It was supposed to be the perfect homecoming. After 2 months overseas, I was finally pulling into my driveway, eager to relax in the comfort of my own mansion. The jet lag was heavy, but the thought of my big leather couch, my favorite coffee maker, and the quiet peace of my neighborhood kept me awake. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back early. I wanted that element of surprise, not for anyone else but for myself. But I had no idea the surprise waiting for me would turn my life upside down. As I parked my car and stepped out, I noticed something strange right away. The front lawn looked different. Fresh flowers planted, patio chairs moved, even a wind chime swinging gently near the porch. I never had a wind chime. At first, I thought maybe my cleaning service had taken it upon themselves to spruce things up while I was gone. But then I saw movement through the front window. Shadow. Someone was inside. My heart started racing. I double-checked the address, half laughing at myself for even thinking I could have pulled into the wrong house. But this was my home. My security system should have alerted me if someone broke in. I walked up the front steps and grabbed my keys, only to find the door unlocked. The moment I pushed it open, a sharp voice rang out from inside. "Who are you?" A woman I had never seen before came rushing into the entryway, wearing yoga pants, a loose t-shirt, and holding a coffee mug like she owned the place. She looked me up and down as if I were the intruder. Before I could even respond, she snatched her phone from the counter and started dialing. "This is private property," she said loudly, as if rehearsing for an audience. "I'm calling the cops." Froze. The nerve of this stranger standing in my house, accusing me of trespassing. It was almost unreal. My first instinct was to demand answers, but my brain was still trying to process what was happening. Who was she? How did she get in here? And why did she act so comfortable, like she'd been here forever? It didn't take long to hear the distant wail of sirens approaching. She smirked slightly, as if confident she was in control of the situation. My neighbors began peeking out from behind curtains, whispering to each other, probably wondering what all the commotion was about. I caught a glimpse of one of them shaking their head at me. In that moment, it hit me. This wasn't just some random trespasser. She was the HOA president's best friend, the type who thrived on neighborhood gossip and power plays. And from the way she moved around the house, she'd been here long enough to know exactly where everything was. The sirens were getting louder. The woman, who I now knew was named Karen, crossed her arms and gave me a look that said, "You're finished." I could already see the officers pulling up. And that's when I realized. She'd been living in my mansion for 2 weeks. But the real question was how. And why did the HOA seem to be covering for her? I stood there in the doorway, my suitcase still by my side, watching Karen pace like she owned every square inch of my living room. She spoke into the phone in that loud, performative tone some people use when they want everyone within earshot to know they're in charge. The words trespasser and dangerous floated in the air, and each one felt like it was being carved into the story she was crafting against me. I tried to get a word in, but she shushed me with a raised finger, like I was an unruly child interrupting an important call. The arrogance in that small gesture made my skin prickle. I glanced around the room and saw more changes. My photos moved, my books stacked differently, and a vase I didn't recognize on the coffee table. There was even a blanket draped over the couch that wasn't mine. This wasn't just someone squatting for a few nights. She had settled in. I set my suitcase down and took a deep breath, reminding myself not to escalate things before the police arrived. Still, I couldn't help but think back to how this might have happened. My last conversation with the HOA president, Mr. Harris, had been months ago. He was overly friendly, but always a little too interested in my travel plans, almost as if he kept a mental schedule of when I'd be gone. I brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just nosy neighbor behavior. But now it felt different. Karen ended her call and turned to me with a tight smile. "The police will be here any minute. I suggest you wait outside." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was the rightful resident protecting her home. The fact that she used my own home in this little performance made my chest tighten. I didn't move. Instead, I asked her the question burning in my mind. "How long have you been here?" Her expression barely flickered. 2 weeks, she said, as if that explained everything. The HOA approved it. That didn't make sense. I never gave permission for anyone to be in my house, and the HOA certainly didn't have the authority to just let someone move in. But the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so confident, made me wonder how deep this really went. The faint glow of red and blue lights started flashing through the front windows. Karen stepped toward the door, ready to greet the officers like she'd been expecting them all along. My neighbors were now fully out on their lawns, whispering to each other, clearly invested in the drama. I caught fragments of their murmurs, words like dispute, break-in, and rich guy trouble. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about a stranger in my home. This was about control. Karen wasn't some random trespasser. She was playing a bigger game. The HO had been oddly quiet for months, and now one of their closest allies was living here rent-free, acting like the rightful owner. The patrol car rolled to a stop. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Karen was already waving them over with a warm smile, ready to spin her story. I knew if I didn't find a way to explain myself quickly, this could go very, very wrong. But before I could speak, one of the officers looked right at me and said, "Sir, we need to hear your side, but you should know she's already shown us paperwork." The word paperwork hit me like a punch. My eyes darted to Karen, who stood there with her arms folded, wearing that smug half-smile like she'd already won. She held a neat folder under her arm, the kind you'd expect for an official presentation, not for explaining why you were living in someone else's mansion. I told the officers calmly that this was my home, that I had the deed, the mortgage records, and every legal document proving it. But they exchanged a quick glance, one of those silent conversations you can't quite read, and then asked to step inside to sort things out. Karen immediately invited them in, her tone dripping with false hospitality, as if she was welcoming guests to her house. The officers spread out, taking in the scene. One of them began leafing through Karen's folder. I couldn't see the details from where I stood, but I caught sight of a letterhead with the HOA's logo. My stomach turned. Whatever this was, it had been planned. Karen began talking fast, describing how she'd been given temporary occupancy, while I was abroad indefinitely. She threw in a few lines about maintaining the property and keeping the neighborhood safe, making herself sound like a selfless guardian rather than an uninvited guest. Every word she spoke was polished, practiced. I noticed one of the officers glancing at the framed photos on the mantel. Photos of me, standing in this very living room. But Karen didn't skip a beat. She casually mentioned that I was a relative who had shown up without notice, and that there had been concerns about my behavior in the past. The twist was so outrageous I almost laughed, but the tightening in my chest reminded me this wasn't a joke. My mind kept flashing back to little things I'd ignored before leaving for my trip. Mr. Harris asking for my itinerary, the HOA requesting a copy of my house key for emergency purposes, the sudden influx of community emails about neighborhood watch. It all seemed harmless then. Now it felt like breadcrumbs leading straight to this moment. The officers finally turned to me, asking for proof of ownership. I told them my documents were in my upstairs office, locked in a fireproof cabinet. But when I said I'd go get them, Karen stepped in quickly. "Oh, I had that room cleaned out," she said sweetly. It was such a mess. That single sentence told me more than I wanted to know. If she had been in my office, she had access to everything. Files, financial records, even personal letters. My head spun as I realized this wasn't just about living here. She'd been digging through my life. The conversation grew tense. The officers weren't openly taking sides yet, but they were clearly caught between 2 conflicting stories. Meanwhile, I noticed movement outside. A figure standing by the HOA office across the street, watching us from the window. It was Mr. Harris. He didn't wave. He didn't come over. He just stood there, as if silently overseeing the entire scene. It was then I realized this conflict wasn't going to be solved in a single conversation with the police. This was bigger. There were too many moving parts. Karen, the HOA, the mysterious paperwork, and whatever Mr. Harris thought he was protecting. The officer holding the folder finally cleared his throat. "Sir," he said carefully, "there's more here than you might realize. We're going to need you to come down to the station to straighten this out." Karen's smile widened. And I couldn't shake the feeling that's exactly what she wanted. The request to come down to the station hung in the air like a final warning bell. My pulse thudded in my ears. Karen was standing just a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes gleaming like she had already rehearsed the scene where I was led away in front of all my neighbors. I could feel their stares from outside, dozens of curious eyes watching from porches, sidewalks, and windows. The neighborhood had gone silent except for the low hum of the patrol car engine. I told the officers I'd go with them if needed, but I wasn't leaving without securing my home first. One of them assured me the property would remain under observation until things were clarified. Karen quickly jumped in, her voice calm but dripping with false concern. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "I'll make sure everything's taken care of here." The casual way she claimed my home in front of law enforcement made my stomach tighten even more. I glanced toward the HOA office across the street. Mr. Harris was gone. The blinds that had been open minutes ago were now drawn shut. That alone sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I couldn't shake the sense that every move tonight had been choreographed long before I arrived. The officers stepped aside so I could grab a few things before leaving. As I walked deeper into the house, I took in all the subtle changes: the smell of a different laundry detergent, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the air, furniture slightly shifted. On my dining table, I noticed a stack of envelopes, all addressed to me but opened. Bills, bank statements, even a letter from my attorney, each one sliced open neatly and placed in a pile. I slipped one of the letters into my pocket without the officers noticing. Something told me it might be important later. From upstairs I heard a faint creak, too heavy for pipes or the settling of the house. Karen was still in the living room, chatting lightly with one of the officers, so whoever was upstairs wasn't her. My chest tightened. I took a step toward the staircase, but before I could move further, one officer called out, urging me to hurry. As I turned back, I caught sight of something else. Near the back door, a set of keys hanging on the hook. Not my keys. They had a tag with the HOA logo, neatly labeled Master Access. That was the moment I understood just how much power they held over every home in this neighborhood. If they had keys to mine, they had keys to all of them. Karen's voice rang out again, interrupting my thoughts. "Ready, sir?" she asked, with the tone of someone escorting a guest from a party that had gone on too long. Her words were polite, but her eyes told a different story. Cold, deliberate, calculating. The officers moved toward the door. My neighbors leaned in, some pretending to check their mail, others just openly watching. The entire street seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd be taken away in handcuffs. Just as we stepped outside, I noticed a dark SUV pulling up slowly to the curb. The windows were tinted, but I could make out a figure in the driver's seat watching intently. The vehicle didn't park, it just idled like it was waiting for the right moment. And then, as the police guided me toward their car, the SUV door opened, and someone stepped out. The figure from the SUV stepped into the glow of the streetlights, and my stomach dropped. It was my property manager, Alan, a man I had trusted for years to oversee maintenance and security whenever I was away. He was holding a thick manila folder, the kind that only appeared during serious business. But it wasn't his presence alone that rattled me. It was the way he walked straight past me and the officers, and went directly to Karen. She greeted him like an old friend, her face lighting up with familiarity. They spoke in low tones, too quiet for me to catch the words, but the body language said enough. This wasn't their first meeting. Alan handed her the folder, and she tucked it under her arm without even glancing inside, as if she already knew what was in it. The officers noticed my reaction, and one of them subtly shifted to block my view, almost as if they were trying to keep me from interfering. My mind was racing. Alan had full access to my home. If he'd been working with Karen and the HOA, they could have staged this whole thing from the start. He was the one who had told me months ago that the security cameras needed an upgrade, and promised to handle it. What if he had replaced them with something they could control? I called out to him, demanding an explanation. Alan finally looked at me, but there was no recognition in his expression, just a guarded, professional mask. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low but firm. "You'll get answers soon enough." That cryptic statement did nothing to calm me. Karen gave a small wave to the SUV, and to my shock, the back door opened. Another person stepped out, Mr. Harris, the HOA president himself. He was dressed in a suit, far too formal for this late hour, and his expression was unreadable. He walked toward us slowly, greeting the officers by name, as if they were old acquaintances. The moment he reached us, he pulled out a document from his inside pocket. "We're here to prevent a misunderstanding," he began smoothly. "This property is under temporary community stewardship due to unresolved matters concerning the owner's absence." His tone was calm, practiced, almost like he was delivering a speech he'd given before. The officers listened without interrupting, but I caught a flicker of discomfort in one of their eyes. They knew this was unusual. Still, no one challenged him outright. I tried to speak, but Harris raised a hand in a quieting gesture. "There are details you're not aware of," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Some things you left behind that need to be handled carefully." His words carried a weight I didn't understand yet, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about someone living in my house. This was about something inside my house, something they didn't want me to touch. Before I could ask what he meant, Alan whispered something to Karen, and she glanced toward the second floor of my home. A shadow moved across one of the upstairs windows. That was when I realized someone else was still inside. All eyes turned toward the upstairs window, the shadow lingering just long enough to confirm it wasn't a trick of the light. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, but one of the officers moved to block me. "We'll check it out," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what he was walking into. Karen's calm smile didn't fade, and that unsettled me more than the shadow itself. The officer called up to whoever was inside, but there was no answer, just the faint creak of floorboards and the sound of something being moved. Then, without waiting for permission, I broke past him and bolted for the stairs. Karen shouted for me to stop, Mr. Harris barked my name, and the other officer moved after me, but I didn't care. This was my home, and I was done being pushed aside. I reached the top of the stairs and froze. Standing in the hallway, holding a small black safe, was a man I had never seen before. He was dressed in dark clothes, no expression on his face, and his eyes flicked from me to the stairs behind me. I recognized the safe instantly. It had been locked in my office, bolted to the floor. "What are you doing with that?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I expected. Before he could answer, Alan appeared at the top of the stairs. "Put it down," he said to the man, but it wasn't the voice of someone stopping a thief. It was the voice of someone containing a situation before it got out of control. The man hesitated, then set the safe on the floor with a heavy thud. Karen and Mr. Harris were now halfway up the stairs, both looking less composed than before. The air was thick with tension, everyone watching everyone else. I moved toward the safe, but Mr. Harris stepped in front of me. "You don't understand what's in there," he said. "I don't care," I shot back. "It's mine." Without another word, I knelt down and spun the combination. The lock clicked open. Inside, instead of money or documents, there was a single thick envelope, and a small, polished wooden box. I recognized the box. It belonged to my late father, something I hadn't touched in years. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting old keepsakes. Instead, inside was a set of keys, none of which belonged to my home, and a sealed letter addressed to me in my father's handwriting. Before I could open it, Karen spoke up, her voice low and almost pleading now. "If you read that, everything changes. For you, and for all of us." The officers looked confused, Alan looked pale, and Mr. Harris looked like he was about to stop me by force. I tore open the envelope anyway. The letter inside was short, only a few lines, but it revealed something that made my breath catch. My father had left me not just the house, but legal ownership of a separate property the HOA had been secretly using for years. A property they never wanted me to know existed. And then came the final line in his handwriting. If you're reading this, they've already tried to take the house. But the real secret is under the other one. That was when I realized this fight wasn't over. My mansion had only been the beginning. The room went still after I read my father's letter. Every set of eyes was locked on me, but I no longer felt cornered. For weeks, maybe months, they had been moving in the shadows, twisting my absence into an opportunity. But now I held something none of them could explain away. My father's words had pulled the rug out from under their careful plans. I closed the safe slowly, slid the letter into my pocket, and looked directly at Mr. Harris. This is my home. And I'm not leaving. My voice was calm, but there was no room for argument in it. Karen shifted uneasily, her confident stance faltering for the first time. Alan looked like he wanted to disappear. The man in black backed toward the stairs, clearly realizing his part in this was finished. The officers exchanged glances again, but this time one of them spoke up. Sir, if you have legal documents proving ownership and there's no court order against you, this property is yours. His partner nodded, adding, We'll need to see IDs from everyone else. It was the first moment the balance of power tipped back in my direction. Karen's paperwork suddenly looked a lot less convincing under police scrutiny. The officers compared it to my deed, which I retrieved from my travel bag. Thankfully, I always carried important copies when I went overseas. The difference was clear, and the officer's voice was firm as he told her she had no legal right to be here. Her face flushed as she tried one last angle. The HOA authorized it, she insisted, but the officer cut her off. HOA authority does not override private property rights. The statement was simple, but it stripped away the last of her defense. Mr. Harris, seeing the situation slip away, stepped forward as if to smooth things over. Let's be reasonable, he said. But the edge in his voice betrayed his frustration. We can still handle this quietly. I looked at him and shook my head. No, we're going to handle it legally. I wasn't going to let their quiet solution bury whatever was at that other property my father mentioned. They might have been able to manipulate things behind the scenes, but in daylight, and with law enforcement present, they had no power over me. The officers began escorting Karen and the unknown man out. Alan lingered, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was regret there, but not enough to erase the betrayal. Without a word, he followed them outside. By the time the patrol cars pulled away, the street had emptied. Curtains dropped back into place. The quiet returned, but it felt different now, like the neighborhood was holding its breath for what might come next. I locked the door behind me, my fingers brushing the envelope in my pocket. The mansion felt both familiar and changed, every room carrying the echo of their intrusion. But I wasn't leaving again. This was my father's home, my home, and now a doorway to something bigger. That night, I sat in my office with the letter spread out in front of me. The other property's address was written in small, deliberate handwriting on the back of the page. I didn't know what I would find there, only that my father had trusted me to guard it. Karen and the HO had played their game, but they'd made one mistake. They thought the mansion was the prize. They had no idea the real secret was still waiting for me. Somewhere else. And as I turned off the light, one thought stayed with me. They would be back. But next time I'd be ready.